extrinsic rewards are basically demotivating and make things less fun because people are just doing the things to get the extrinsic reward, which ultimately is kind of hollow, right?
It's like an interesting challenge to like whittle a puzzle down to its core elements without making it trivial, leaving plenty of room for like wrong solutions.
Like the designer is asking the player to do work. Like you're doing work to figure this out, right? And then the question is, what do we have to give you in return for the amount of work that you're doing? You know, maybe the more interesting it is, the more we're allowed to ask you to work for that.
We gathered here today with Jonathan Blow and Billy Basso to discuss Order of the Sinking Star. The demo that just released, supposedly it's supposed to be ended now, but it's now still available. So if you want, and if you didn't do it so far, you should go to Steam directly and download it while you can. Can we start the discussion about the reception, general reception? And I think gradually as we talk, we'll go deeper and deeper into the puzzle design questions. So let's start sort of outside, high level, and we'll go deeper. What was the reception?
I mean, in some way, I'm the worst person to ask, right? Because I obviously have you always have a very biased view of your own game and whatever. But it seems very good to me. You know, the review scores are good. There's a lot of reviews. There's a decent number of people playing it. We got on, you know, Valve had this sort of, so there's something like 5,000 demos in the Next Fest or something, and that's not like really a real number because again, a lot of those are just like slop games, whether they're AI slop or not, or like somebody pushed the make game button in Unity manually, right? Still, like a decent number of those are not what you would consider real games. But even so, if you look down the page at like all the real games, there's a lot. There's probably at least 800 or 1,000 real games in there. I don't even know. And so we got in like the top 50 list that they posted afterwards of the most played, you know, so people liked it. And all of this is kind of surprising to some people, right? Because, you know, the general genre of the game is like Sokoban game, right? Which nobody knows what that means. So, video game history moment, right? The Sokoban game genre comes from the 1980s on home computers. There was a guy in Japan who made this game called Sokoban. It's a Japanese word that means warehouse keeper, and Sokoban was about pushing blocks and just getting them on the right spot. And so the genre name has come to mean a game where you push blocks. And it's like not super popular in terms of what people play, right? There are, I mean, at this point on Steam, a bunch of games in this genre come out every year, but, you know, again, hardly anyone plays them. You wouldn't have heard of most of them. Once in a while, there are some that do okay for indie puzzle games, right? And so part of the thesis, well, okay, I honestly didn't think about this hard in the beginning, but it was like, hey, I just want to make this game, and I always just make what I want to make, and then later it's like, okay, how do we try to convince people that they're interested in this thing? Because I think you need to do that as an indie, right? Because, well, I don't know what indie means anymore, but in the style of indie that I come from, you're generally trying to do things that are creatively not what the mainstream industry would do, what the big money games would do. And if you just start thinking down this pathway of what are people going to buy or what are people going to play, that's the same thought process that like Electronic Arts is doing all the time, right? And so if that's how you design your game, it's maybe not going to be that creative, right? I mean, unless you have a really special spark or something, which does happen sometimes.
Hi everyone, let me take a break to thank members of the show who made this conversation possible. Members get earlier access to videos, including longer unedited footage from live streams, as well as they're invited to our private Discord server. If you want to support this show, there is no better way than becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon. Thank you so much.
So I just wanted to make this game. I saw that there was a lot of cool stuff about it. And I was like, okay, later we'll just try to deal with getting people to like it. But then, as we got further through development, it was like, okay, we learned some stuff, and maybe we'll talk specifically about some of this. But when you work on one of these for a long time, you can get clarity if your eyes are open and you're being perceptive about what actually is good about these games and what actually is like not that good. When people sort of bounce off them and find them not fun, are there reasons for that, right? And then also, we try to make it look a lot nicer, like, and all these things. Part of the thesis was, we started this game by basing it on 4 games that already existed when we started. And these were all like free web games with terrible graphics and terrible sound effects. Like the characters are like 3x5 pixels or whatever. And I thought they were really great games. But I also noticed they were getting a lot of attention again among like puzzle enthusiasts on the internet, but nobody else knew that they existed. And like, why is that? And it's like, well, if the games sort of turn you off with presentation in the beginning, then people who don't already know these are good won't stick around to find out how they're good. They'll just be like, oh, I don't get it, and bounce off. And so, I don't know, all these things were part of the thought process. And then later in development, it's like, okay, we're going to have, try to have interesting characters and story and stuff. And at one point I thought I was going to do big cutscenes, and then it would have been too big of a project and even more expensive than it already was. And so we didn't do that, but I think it's quite natural the way that the story weaves in. And just as we get closer to release, I'm always like, okay, it's not about how do you figure out how to make a game that appeals to people in a cynical way, but it's like, look, we've worked so hard for like 9 years on this really good stuff, like the meat of the game. And then in the final part of development, it's just like, how do you help people connect to the good thing that's already there? Because if you don't do that, then ignoring even anything, about finances or anything, it's just like, well, if you work that hard on something, don't you want people to play it and enjoy and see what's cool about it, right? And see what's nice about it. And so that's a lot of my job a lot of my job is just getting the frickin' game done at all, because there's always so much to do in a game. But a lot of my job is just, let's make sure, because when you're a developer, you see it so close and you know everything about it. And there's all these things that are maybe not good that you're used to. And so we're always just trying to just have fresh eyes and see it and be like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, because if we don't, it's not living up to its potential. I feel like I went very far from the original question there.
The original.
But that's what's been going on.
The reception, as you mentioned, it's like one of the most played Steam Next Fest demos that have participated in the program. I was wondering, Billy, how did it look like? What did it look like for you? The reception of the game, like the starting experience.
It was great experience overall, and I saw a lot of people were playing it and played on the Steam Deck, and was able to run it on that, and and there weren't any bugs, and all the puzzles were were really like creative, and each one like had a new idea to it, and it was a good time, and it just seemed like a lot of people were liking it.
I was wondering how specifically is it possible to lay out the puzzles, especially in the beginning, that they don't feel like puzzles, even like they don't feel like work, like there is a specific, like super nice progression in the demo. Like wherever you go, especially if you go up top with the heroes section, you start to solve these puzzles, and I had like sort of expectations, like, oh no, it's gonna be giant, it's gonna be, you know, work. At some point, it's gonna be just like you are just stuck against an issue and you need to solve it, and it didn't feel like this at all. Is there some sort of specific design idea or behind it, how to lay the puzzles and just make this progression smooth?
Yeah, there's a bunch of components to this answer, right? So the thing that you're describing about puzzles feeling like work. So first of all, I think that's what most Sokoban style games end up feeling like. Even for someone like me, you know, I like these kind of games. I play them a lot, and once in a while I'll play a game. I'll name drop a particular game. I think the demo's on Steam. Or wait, did the full game? I don't know. Anyway, so a particular game I'm thinking of is Can of Wormholes. I don't remember if the full game came out or not at this point. But I really like that game. It's a really good game. But also, man, it gets really hard sometimes. And it just, like, I would end my play session and be like, I don't want to work this hard and stuff. And so for me, as someone who does puzzle games for a living, I can see my appreciation of what it's doing with the levels, but I totally get how other people would not want to work that hard, right? And so, and then even with our own game, we would go and design levels. And, you know, we want this game to be some kind of design tour de force. And what does that mean? And you're figuring out what that means, right? And part of it I had from previous games, which is like, look, every level has an idea and you want people to see the idea, right? But then I think early on we had some other things that were incorrect or were not helpful. Like anytime we designed a level, it's like, okay, this level has a mirror and like a crystal and the thief or something. And the idea of the level is to do this thing over here. But then while we've got the mirror and the thief and the crystal, don't we want to like maximize the amount of puzzling in the level, because that's major density and like makes it more of a tour de force puzzle. So in order to get the crystal over to where you're going to need it to do the idea, you do this cool thing and that cool thing and this and all these hard puzzle maneuvers. And at some point, about a third of the way through development, or probably halfway through development, I was just playing these puzzles over and over again. And I was just like, okay, I'm really tired and I don't want to do this. You know, and it's easy to feel that way about your own game when you're working hard on it all the time and stuff, right? But like, I was like, oh my God, why am I doing? And then, so what I realized about that kind of a thing, about trying to maximize the puzzling in every level, was it actually defocuses the game. Because, so you made me do a bunch of activities on the level that are not necessarily about the core idea of the level, right? And that can obscure the core idea. Like, if the idea is, you know, you have to use the mirror with the crystal in the right position or whatever, if I can't even get the crystal close to that position, I'm going to have a really hard time thinking about and considering that possibility, right? Because I'm just stuck in this early thing. And so we made a very deliberate decision early on to stop that. I put my foot down and said, no unnecessary Sokobaning. And it's a Sokoban game, right? So we redesigned all the levels so that, like, it's a good heuristic is if it's pretty straightforward to just drag the objects where you need to do the solution, like if it's a few moves with no obstructions to just put things where you need them. And then the key to whether you win the level or not is just, do you understand what you need to do? And then when we design the visuals, we try to focus, you know, so there's this classic thing that happens when you make games, especially puzzle games, is like you're making them with designer art or just boxes or whatever, and everything's very clear. And then you start putting all this art in and it becomes hard to read the level, and there's all these things drawing your attention away from what's important. And so the art direction process is a lot about, especially in the beginning when we're establishing the look of the game, it's like the art must not make things unclear. It must not make it harder for you to think about the puzzles. And so the gridding is clear everywhere, right, on the play surfaces and all this stuff. There's nothing in the background that looks foregroundy. And there's all these rules about contrast because like high variation in contrast will draw your eye. And if we're drawing your eye away from the important part of the level, that's not good. There's a bunch more we could say there, but I think the last thing that's important also though is actually two more things I want to say. One is we just started with a really good foundation. So like I said, there were these 4 games that already existed by different designers, and I picked them, because I saw they could interoperate together, but also because I just really liked what was inside these games. And so, like with the heroes that you mentioned, for example, there's just this fundamentally fun and joyful thing about like they have these simple abilities and they interact in this really fun, funny, like, but comedy of errors kind of way where you're constantly like accidentally dragging your friend or teleporting with the wrong thing and stuff, and that's,
I was so
that
annoyed.
can be really
I was
fun.
so annoyed with the mage, and this like when I first met him and the crystals, and there was this level with like full of crystals, and I was like, brother, stop doing that. I just want to move you, please.
Yeah. Well, that if you mean the one where they're separated on all the buttons, yeah, that's a recent level that I added, so that one's my fault. So there's that. So we had a good foundation, and we went with those original games. We revised a bunch of levels, we cut some, we added a bunch. We changed some fundamental abilities. So the druid's abilities in this game are fundamentally more powerful than they were in Heroes of Sokoban. But people can go, if you go search Heroes of Sokoban puzzle script, you could play the original game for free on the web, and you'll see the difference. One or two more things I wanted to say about that, though. The unnecessary Sokobaning that I mentioned, that we pulled out of the game, it's not just that it's hard and it grinds you... Like, if it grinds you down and makes you tired, your brain is less fresh, and so everything is harder also, right? But it also makes every level the same. Like... Because if every level you're just trying to solve some maze of how do I get this crystal over here so I could even do anything with it, then every level becomes the same experience, and that detracts from this theory that every level has its own idea, right? If you spent most of your time not thinking about the idea, that's bad. And then that played into this next thing that we realized, which is, like I said in previous games, I had this idea that when a level or a puzzle has a very clear idea that it communicates to you, that makes it good, right? And the interestingness of the idea is the magnitude of how good you feel. With this game, it became very clear as well that there's like a balance where when you play a game, especially a puzzle game, like the designer is asking the player to do work. Like you're doing work to figure this out, right? So we're asking you to work. And then the question is, what do we have to give you in return for the amount of work that you're doing? And is it enough? And so for any particular puzzle, it's going to be more interesting or less interesting. How cool is the idea behind this puzzle, right? And, maybe the more interesting it is, the more we're allowed to ask you to work for that, because you're getting more in the end and it feels worth it. And you're like, okay, I'll keep playing, right? But if it's not that interesting, we shouldn't ask you to work that hard. And then especially, we probably, in a long game, just the more we ask you to work, the more tired you're going to get. And so we're walking this very fine line of like, we actually don't want things to be super hard because the game's so big that we would just, knock people out before the end anyway. And we want them to see as much as they can, because we built so much cool stuff. So we don't want the puzzles to be super hard, but if we just give you the answer, I've had this experience with some other puzzle games that I think are too easy. If we just give you the answer, your brain doesn't actually engage with the idea very much, and then you don't see the coolness of the idea really. You just sort of gloss over it. And so the puzzles have to be a little bit challenging, at least. But we could have made the game way harder, right? Like a lot of people, that's their idea of a puzzle game, is like, oh, a puzzle game is something really hard where you prove that you're smart. And we're like, no, not really, not this time. There are some hard puzzles, but they're optional and they're occasional.
Yeah, the thing I've noticed with like a lot of video game puzzles is sometimes like you can kind of just sleepwalk through the puzzle, and like if there is a thing in a level, if there's like a lever, like I know just ahead of time, like I'm gonna have to pull this lever. I might as well just do it. And like like if there's something interactive, like it's like they usually only leave like one like state that the world could be in, and you can kind of just mush your way through it and find the solution without even like thinking critically about things. But so I think like it's like an interesting challenge to like whittle a puzzle down to its core elements without making it like trivial, and still having it be like leaving plenty of room for like wrong solutions. And you need to like be intentional about like the things you're manipulating in the level to like come to the solution. And then the other thing I was thinking about while playing the demo, is I think it like I don't play like a ton of puzzle games because they can kind of be fatiguing, and especially ones that are just structured with like a level select screen. Like it almost feels like asking the player to like eat a whole like box of chocolates like all in one sitting, where it's like you do one and then your reward is like, okay, well here's another puzzle. Like it's like a very like kind of dense like mental experience to like sit and work through like a hard kind of Sokoban puzzle. So I think having the open world, the overworld to go explore, and having these 4 different kind of completely different games is very nice. You can go wander over into a different section, and I really like that the promise area was like kind of much bigger in scope, and it was like one like huge puzzle, and that was kind of like a refreshing change of pace, where it's like, oh, I can like this one's going to take like an hour or something to like pick away at and untangle this big ball of yarn. But I felt like in that case I was like really working towards something like meaningful, and I knew like I'm like after this I'm probably going to be kind of done with this section, so I'm like really invested in it. Versus like the other parts, they were more bite-sized, but it was really nice to have the balance and like the freedom to bounce around between all that.
Yeah, and all that is what we're trying to do from a design standpoint. So I'm glad to hear it worked, and especially I've always been a very experience-centric designer in that I care what experience the player is having, but kind of in a different way than a lot of people in the industry. Because sometimes when people say that, they mean that like they're always designing around emotion and trying to create emotional moments. But I'm not. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to tell people how to feel, but it's more like intellectually interesting moments. Like, oh, I see that this thing is happening, or I see that I have a particular choice here, and isn't that interesting? But I like to give people a lot of freedom. There are downsides to giving people a lot of freedom, because it could be overwhelming or it could be confusing, especially in a game this complicated, where you essentially get thrown around. Like the beginning of the game is there's a lot of ingredients in, oh, I'm in this place and I don't know what it is, and I hear these audio logs from this other character and I don't know who he is, and I don't really find out anytime soon. And then maybe I go to Heroes first, and now I'm suddenly a different character and I don't know who that is, right? And so, I think that works better or worse depending on who the player is. But, in general, the design goal is to give people the freedom to do what they decide to do, and then just try to give them the highest quality experience, based on that. And so with the Promise area, for example, so people can go play Promised 1 by Sean Barrett. It's on the internet. Sean Barrett, who I believe has been on your podcast before.
Couple of times,
yeah.
Promised. It's like a different spelling, right? Promised with double S.
It's an anagram. It's an anagram of Smeestorp, which is the name of the wacky internet name of a puzzle designer.
What? Okay.
So trivia for you. Okay. Anyway, someone out there can find it and share the link in chat. So Promised One, I really liked it when I first played it. We have revised it a fair bit. It is significantly easy. It probably took me like, you just said an hour. Like this will probably take me an hour. The original version, my memory of it, of course, I played it a long time ago. It's probably was more like 6 hours for me, 5 or 6 hours to play through, because it's a lot harder. And there's a few reasons it's a lot harder. One is just you can't really see things as well, because you can't really see neighboring screens. Like in the version in this game, you have some margin, so you have more situational awareness, and you can zoom out and like play from that scale. Which takes the place of the mini-map in Old Promise. The mini-map was like dots, and you have to sort of decode in your brain all the time what these dots mean and where they are. And it just, all these incidental things make it a lot harder, right? And so that was one thing I wanted to do, was like remove there's like artificial difficulty like that. Like I'm staring at the mini-map and I don't know what color these beams are. Or no, I think you see the color, but not what direction they're pointing, which is pretty important, right? And so, just fixing stuff like that. But then from a design standpoint, it's like, okay, what are the really valuable experiences here? And can we just sort of streamline it and focus more on the most valuable of the valuable experiences, and sort of trim out things that are just kind of like agonizing and confusing and don't have as big of a payoff, right? And so our version is simpler. It's still the same basic, if you compare the two side by side, you're like, yeah, this is the same basic game, but a lot of things are kind of changed. And those are all judgment calls that I think need to be made very carefully, because especially in this case, the cool thing about Promised is it's this big space full of interconnected things, and anytime you're solving a puzzle, you're like looking at what on the map could influence this thing that I'm trying to do over here, right? And you could spoil that. Like if you went too far in the direction of, look, I just want to make this easy and playable for people or whatever. Like if Electronic Arts were to revise this, they would like take out everything that's good about it probably. And so you just have to be really careful, I think.
All right. I have a question about that, specifically with the mini map, because it was using the zoom out a lot while in that section, and I noticed that the overall map size, like in the X axis, it all does fit on there, and you could see that it wraps a little bit, but in the Y axis you can see like 3 of the 4 screens, so that added like, I feel like a lot of sort of difficulty to it, because I was constantly like forgetting like what was on the one row that I couldn't see, so I was like kind of needing to move.
This sounds like this is one of those subtle things in games that like we could probably do a better job at. So there are 2 overhead views. There's the Q view, which is 3x3, and there's the tab view, which is the entire map. And it sounds like you're playing in the Q view probably.
Okay.
And the thing is, the Q view, maybe we should remove the Q view because the problem is, so the Q view is really made for like the overworld and other levels that are huge, where you can't really play at a fully zoomed out view because you're just too small, you can't see anything, right? And so Q view is 3x3 screens at a time. And then because you're at it fits the 3 vertically, and so because you're at a wider aspect ratio, you could probably see everything horizontally, right? Tab view would fit the entire map vertically. And now in this level we're talking about, it's only 4/3 as big, and so maybe we should make them just be the same thing. But that's one of these things where, as developers, we're not necessarily thinking that hard about this, that players might be confused by this. And then you see people play the demo and you see this happening and you're like, oh, okay. We have an extra thing to work on that we didn't realize.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure. I'm like, is this part of the challenge of the puzzle? Is this like the intended experience, or is this just like some unnecessary friction?
I will say when you're on either of those screens, it does prompt you about the other one. It'll say like press tab for full view, but it's drawn in the corner, and you're probably ignoring it, and especially in a game this complicated where there's a lot to look at. And so these are just, game development things where we have to look at this and say, can we do this better? It's a little too late to change the mechanism of two different view levels, but yeah, maybe we make them the same in small maps like this, or I don't know, maybe there's some other solution.
I had no idea there's Q view. I only use tab view. And
Okay.
I have,
So you would not have had this problem.
yeah, I had full, I think 4x4 because
Yeah.
I didn't recall.
I was playing on a controller also, so it was analog R3 and maybe L3 view.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah, we need to figure that out.
It would be funny if the game would be harder because of that, if you played on a like wide screen, because now you cannot fit all the rows, and it's just like that's a harder level.
Well, we actually, we try to think about that. So based on, on a PC, you have no idea what aspect ratio people are playing on. So we have, 16:9 is one of the most common aspect ratios. So when we design everything, we say there's a 16:9 region in which all the gameplay critical things must appear. And then if you have a wider aspect ratio than 16:9, there's like, you can see some additional stuff, but none of it's allowed to be gameplay critical. And then past some width, if you have like super, super ultra wide, we just letterbox at some point because we can't do art for all these things. I mean, the level that we were talking, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but the level we were just talking about is like wrapping. And so you can't ever see out of bounds on that level, but most levels in the game are just like a scene with a relatively fixed camera that we built. And, past some point, there's like no graphics for the scene, right? And then, if you're in a taller aspect ratio, like 4:3, we let you see a little bit more vertically. But again, nothing gameplay critical is allowed to happen outside the 16:9.
Okay. In this game, I feel like there is way more narrative or like emphasis on narrative than it used to be, especially in The Witness, because in The Witness we had the audio logs, which we can find here. But also, for example, if you go into Heroes area, there's like, you had a narrator, now you have heroes, now there are jokes happening, like what is happening? Is this a Jonathan Blow game? And my question is, did something change? Is it trying to keep up with the original spirit, for example, of the game, or is
No.
or what is going on the narrative side?
No. Well, the original games, none of them had characters talking really. So that's all new. It's just, every game kind of wants something different, right? Firstly, at obvious levels, like what design decisions do you make on this game versus that game? Well, it depends on what the rest of the design is, like what makes sense. And then in terms of, story and stuff, I actually have for a long time, you can go back to like 2007 and see speeches I gave about how story in games is not that good of an idea and is mishandled a lot, right? But there are things you can do that are effective sometimes, right? And so in this game, in the heroes area especially, the game mechanics are about the characters, and so you're supposed to be getting like a feeling of the characters from the gameplay. And then if story can reinforce the sense of character, then it's probably helpful. And if it at least cooperates with the characters and doesn't, mess them up, then it's at least not hurting the game, right? So there's that axis of it, which is just, can you double down and emphasize what the game is about? And so then this is a little bit of a hard writing project, but, you can do really interesting things where game design affects the story, maybe in ways that most people are never going to notice. But so if you're going to make characters for the warrior and the thief and the wizard, right? There's really obvious things. You can just go to the Dungeons and Dragons archetypes and be like, warrior is really strong, and he goes, and he pushes, right? and thief is like untrustworthy and whatever. But for this, okay, so the game mechanics are already analogs of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So warrior is really strong. He pushes as many things as he wants. Thief, like, compulsively takes things. And wizard, discontinuously moves by teleport swapping, right? And so this is a very difficult writing exercise. But what I did was take those specific game mechanics and port them back to the character, right? And so the warrior, when he talks about things, the way he thinks about things, he's always about making straightforward progress and doesn't want to, like, take a lot of side paths and whatever, right? So thief, she's always about bringing things closer to her. She can't push things away. And so that includes, like, at a human level, like personalities, like other people, other characters. She likes everybody, because she's about bringing things closer to her, right? She even likes the bad guy, even though he's the bad guy. And then wizard, so you could have this stereotypical, like, oh, I'm a smart guy, or like, I'm a forgetful old guy. And there's a little bit of that, but it's more, there's a very specific, like, his thoughts go, 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 like he's walking, and then skip, and then go, 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 and then skip, right? And so it's fun to try and do that. Now, in a game of this size, it's so hard to even do anything at all across the entire game. And so we're going to see how consistently this can be done. But this, hopefully I'm laying out how this makes a little bit of sense in a way it didn't in previous games. And then, in other worlds, the guideline is just that the story, because in other worlds, it tends to be a little bit more about mechanics of objects than mechanics of characters. In Promise, it's a little bit of both, because you've got a guy, he can, like, hold stuff and hoard gems, but there's also lots of objects in the world that have these mechanics. And so if the story is always focused on the gameplay and sourced from the gameplay, it probably can't ever be too terrible. Even if you write a line that's, like, really bad, it's still, like, on target for what the game's about, right? And then the other thing, in terms of the game as a whole, this is maybe not something I want to spoil super much today, but, like, there's a pretty interesting, deep thematic thing behind the game as a whole that's pretty hard to understand. And so I think that's part of what the story is meant to do here. Eventually, you don't really get there in the demo, but eventually, part of the role of the story is to just help say, like, look, this is why it's interesting to bring these worlds together in this way. Aside from just being a fun game, like, here's why it's interesting. And I don't think that that's something that most people, or hardly any people, would ever get if we don't talk about it. And so we need a way to talk about it. And then if we talk about it well, then that can reinforce the play experience, because it's like, oh, you played some stuff, you had this experience, and then we reflect on it in the story and help you notice certain things about the experience that you just had that you might not have noticed. So that's all. That's why. But it's hard. Probably where I spend the most time from now until release is improving story stuff. and just making it better and making it happen through the game.
Do you want to allude a little bit towards the main storyline, name of the game, poem, something like that? Or we keep this for a full release?
Well, no, I can say some things. So it's a complicated game, right? There's 4 worlds that you go into that each have separate characters and mechanics. There's, like, the overworld in the intro level, which is a 5th world. And then there's, like, 2 other worlds. There's the world that the overworld character, the queen, comes from, that we don't ever see, but you could infer some stuff about it. And then there's the world that the guy leaving the audio logs comes from. So there's really, like, 7 worlds in the game, and it's all pretty complicated. But one of the main stories, and this is the storyline by which we end up talking about some of these thematic things that I just mentioned. But it's also where you just figure out what does the name of the game mean and why is all this set up. It starts out as the story of those audio logs, right? Because, for people who played the demo, these are recordings left by some guy who was here before you. And we take it a little step further. It's like, it's not just that like, oh, he was randomly in this place, but he's been through all the experiences that you're going through now, like before. So he sort of like played the game before you, right? And he went through whatever process this was that playing the game is meant to facilitate. And so as you go later through the game, that stream of story sort of branches out. He ends up talking to some other people in those audio logs, and some things get explained. And I don't know, this is all very vague, but that becomes sort of the main thread that tells you about the backstory of what is happening here and why. And then the end games also. Like the end games are... So there's a 3-ending structure to the game. The game is so big you can't really expect a lot of people to ever finish it. Some people will. Some people finish it. We had a playtester who just blasted through it. But, a lot of people... Some of our other playtesters took a year to play the whole game, just so you know. And so you kind of need to give people multiple levels that they could engage with the game. And one of those ways is like, look, here's sort of the main line of the game. And if you get to this point and you finish this ending, you can feel satisfied and like you did a good job. And there are more puzzles, but you don't necessarily need to play them if you don't want to. And then how do you do that while respecting players? Well, it can't be that that's the bad ending. Like, because if the ending one is the bad ending, then you're telling people they failed by like not playing the game further, right? So it has to be a good ending. It is a good ending, but for the other endings, you basically get more information, right? You start to hear from more directions about what's going on, and you get more nuance into the backstory, and you get more questions answered about what's been going on. So that's the overall structure.
I'm super interested to hear Billy's thoughts about endings, given Animal Well and like deep puzzles.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I always think of the endings almost as like different stopping points for different types of players or people with like different levels of commitment to the game. And I think like the different endings almost kind of separate different types of like content. Like if you want just like a straightforward, like a kind of puzzle platformer or Metroidvania, and you're just looking to play a normal game, then like you would stop after the second ending. But then if you have more patience and you like scrutinizing the map for secrets and you want to spend more time with it and you're not like ready to, then it's like there's another ending for you. And then if you're like a kind of a conspiracy theorist type that really wants to like uncover every other thing, then it's like there's got to be something that acknowledges like that effort as well. So yeah, I always like, try to have a good attitude about people stopping the game after the first ending. It's like, I of course want everybody to like keep playing and see all the stuff, but it's like, okay, if you want to stop playing, that's fine. Well, you can part ways right now. And, as long as you had a good time, I won't hold it against you.
There's also a question from the audience that is related. For the ultra dedicated, will there be any Easter eggs in the game we should look for? Is the ending structure, will it be based on the sort of difficulty and perseverance, or more on the secret and like conspiracy theory fans?
There's definitely stuff, okay, but in terms of difficulty, so as a game designer, one of the things a lot of designers do, especially in our early games, is like, oh, we're going to put in some super challenging secret thing that like, oh, it's such an ordeal to do. And then there's a lot of different ways that plays out, but I've basically seen them all at some point. So one day I was at a party talking to Phil Fish, creator of Fez, and he was telling me this, right? Oh, it's going to be so hard to do all the puzzles. It'll take people months and whatever. And of course, you release it on the internet, and people play it, and like in a day and a half, people have figured everything out. Somebody's figured everything out, and it's there for everybody else, right? And so, I mean, that's a certain kind of a cool thing, but it's not the same as it would have been in like a pre-internet society where like you're a player who can discover something and like you wouldn't have known about it and it's magical. Like probably almost everybody who discovers this thing like saw a YouTube video with it or whatever. And that's just the reality that we're in now. And so that changes that a little bit. Another thing, so when I made Braid, I was like, oh, there's going to be subtle stuff in the game where if people just put a lot of attention in and really focus and notice, they'll get it. And I think that's a noble thing to do, but I lean away from that kind of design now just because people kind of don't have attention spans anymore, and they're in this environment where everything is trying to grab their attention 24/7, and like that kind of design doesn't work as well as it would have, a long time ago. Just expecting people to notice things. And so maybe it's a bad thing, but I don't do as much of that anymore. Now, on the flip side of what I'm saying is, as a game gets bigger, I mean, Animal Well was a pretty big, complicated game with like a lot of disparate elements, right? Or even just things happening in different locations that you sort of have to put together in your mind. Oh, this is related to this or whatever. And the bigger a game is, the more of that kind of stuff there is sort of naturally, like, this game contains elements where I need to sort of realize that I saw this thing over here and I saw it again over here, and like, maybe these things are related. And so you kind of don't need to add more of that stuff if it's there naturally already. And so that's one thing that happened in this game is, there's interesting things about mechanics, about how certain objects work and whatever. And depending on the order in which you play the game, because there's a lot of nonlinearity, it could be 50 or 100 hours since you saw something. And then you have an opportunity to use that idea, and it's like, well, do you even remember that was a thing? And that's a sort of like a natural difficulty that exists. But then in terms of all the story layer of the game as well, the degree to which it makes sense and is understandable and is worthwhile, I think is going to depend on the degree to which the player was paying attention the whole time. And it's sort of like a natural puzzle where, the game doesn't necessarily acknowledge that you solved a puzzle. This is actually something I did to different degrees in Braid and The Witness. It's different than this game, but like in Braid, and then especially in The Witness, there's explicitly a design where there's a series of puzzles that they're a puzzle, you're told they're a puzzle, and then you solve it, and then you get the solution, and you get acknowledgement that you were successful. And then there's a set of puzzles that you're not told are puzzles, but when you solve it, you get confirmation that you solved something. And then there are things in the game that you're not told are puzzles, and there is no verb or interactivity to them. It's just you either notice them or you don't, and so you don't get confirmation from the game that you solved them. And so there's like a spectrum of, and this goes to what Billy was saying about different levels of player engagement, right? Is like those things that don't have explicit confirmation are really only for the most engaged players, because something about the confirmation, it's going to be hard to verbalize this thought, but as soon as you give people confirmation that they solved something, you're removing necessity for some level of thought from the process. It's like, oh, I did the thing, I got the thing. And if there are things that people never, they just have to know that they know the thing. There's no other thing. Then that just requires perceptiveness and smartness, and you just have to know that you're right to enjoy that. And I think that's what some of the story stuff is going to be in this game, is like, you either have to know that you understand it, or you just don't understand it, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I think it's, I've been trying to categorize these types of like sort of secrets into like in different ways now. Like one thing I've noticed, like since Animal came out, like there's a set of secrets that are all like sort of take the form of finding a rabbit in the world. And in my mind, when I was designing that, I'm like, oh, just like a tiny fraction of players are going to find each of these, and maybe then they'll have to kind of tell each other about them, and it'll be like a fun surprise that you even found it in the first place. And in a way, because of that, I was not really designing them as like fair puzzles. They were not like puzzles in my mind. They were just like secrets in the game to find. And I think trying to like categorize things either as like puzzles, like really, really hard puzzles, secrets, or like tricks. It's like a new like thing that I feel like I'm starting to categorize things as this like, oh, this is something interesting that you could do in the game that is not obvious. And yeah, there's no explicit like reward or acknowledgement of it, but it's like a neat thing. It's like something you would be eager to like tell someone about. Like, did you know like, you could jump on the frisbee or whatever while running forward. That's like a trick you can do, like in like a yo-yo trick or a.
But you require that for some puzzles, right? So
I do, but like maybe you can imagine if you did, if I didn't. So it's maybe not like a perfect example, but like maybe it makes like the game easier in some way, or maybe it's just kind of superfluous, but it's interesting. So I feel like because for the rabbits, because I acknowledge that you found it and they like kind of show up in this area and there's something kind of tied behind it, people did not view those as secrets. They viewed it as a set of puzzles that you had to complete. So they felt like a lot of people felt obligated to do them all. And in the process, they also felt like it was unfair. So it was like almost this third set of puzzles that were really difficult, like unfairly difficult. And I think if you viewed them that way, it was kind of frustrating. So I think really how you present this stuff is important.
Yeah, I think I got into the rabbit territory of the game, and I did a fair number of them. But then I was like, okay, these are kind of random one-offs, and I guess I started detecting about it what you're saying is like, oh, this isn't exactly, this isn't exactly a systemic thing that I'm meant to like play through according to the normal rules of a game, right? Mm-hmm. But it's weird. I think as soon as, like you're saying, as soon as you count the rabbits and you put the representation somewhere, it's an indication to players that they're like supposed to, well, not only supposed to do them all, but there's this weird thing where it's like the game's sort of saying that if you don't do them all, it's your fault in some way. If you think of yourself as a good gamer, but then if the player doesn't think that they're like fair in some way, then the player could blame the game for like blaming the player, and it becomes this whole weird thing. Mm-hmm. But I also don't know that there's an easy answer to this, because like, let's say you had rabbits in Animal Well and they just weren't counted ever. Like the game didn't even know how many, right?
To be specific, in this case, you don't know there are rabbits in the game, and then you find one. It does mark it on your save file, but it doesn't show a number. And then if you do find 2, it says 2, but it never tells you like the maximum amount. So that's like. But in that situation, I think people still wanted to collect them all, not even knowing how many there were. So it's like it doesn't take much to set people on this train of thought.
I think someone in chat told me how many there were or something. Like I think I knew how many there were for some reason. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing. Like sometimes in design, it's not obvious for a while. I mean, I think the way this always works is you do a game, you do things a certain way, and you just reflect on that, and you're like, for the next game, you're like, okay, what am I going to do? It's probably not going to be exactly the same thing next time because I did that. And so, designers were always thinking about like, what is the right thing to do next time? And I don't know. I mean, you thought about that particular rabbit issue much more than me. I mean, I guess in Braid, there's a mildly similar thing where there's some stars that you get that are counted. But there aren't that many, and so that's also makes it a different thing when there are not that many. But it's also not super systemic in a certain way where, like, they're kind of unfair in Braid in that there's no indication where they possibly could be throughout the game, right? People might find one, and then once you find one, I think if I'm going to say there's a very explicit design flaw, it's like once you find one, you're like, now I have to brute force search the whole game to figure out where these other ones might be. And these days, I don't know that I would do that. But again, back then, I think things were different. The internet was not so noisy. There was maybe this idea that like, oh yeah, you're going to enjoy that if you're a very serious player or whatever. But I wouldn't do that way now, I don't think.
Yeah, but then it's difficult, like you're saying, like, I remember thinking, like, it would be great if this type of secret in a game, like, did actually lead to something, and it wasn't just a one-off thing, and it, like, if you did find them all, they'd culminate into something meaningful, and you'd get acknowledged for that. So it's like, if you don't do that, I mean, like, I feel like that...
Maybe they're bits of the Frisbee platform, and now you call out on the Frisbee, right? Yeah. I don't know. So what makes sense there, I think, depends tremendously on the game, which is why it becomes hard to talk about, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny, like the moment you put a number, like you say, hey, you got 1 out of X, now you're like, okay, now this is my goal and I'm supposed to do it. And then as a player, I will be like frustrated with the game if it's too difficult to find them. And like suddenly it's an objective for the player because there's a number to it.
Yeah, but I feel like there's also something interesting about, I don't know, maybe this is me just being kind of like annoying towards players, but like trying to convince them that it's okay to not collect everything and to like be content in life with not checking all the boxes.
It's a deep lesson. Lesson.
But in like a really like kind of trolly way.
But the people who really like your game are not going to feel that way naturally, right? So
yeah. I
don't know. And then can you make that happen in some way that's like organic? And I don't actually know. I feel like that's not the video game personality, right?
Right, and it's like, can you have a big opportunity to teach a lot of people an important life lesson. Like
is it though?
You've like selected the audience.
Oh, you've pre-selected with Animal Well, and your next game I'm gonna teach the lesson.
I'm gonna lure you in based on your personality type, and then. Give you
the only idea that I have about how to fix this is to also enforce it mechanically and make that clear early. So like if you imagine, let's say, I'm going to say rabbit, but I don't mean rabbits in Animal. I mean equivalent thing in some other game, right? Imagine you get the first 1 or 2 and it makes it clear that now you can't get these other ones because they're mutually exclusive. And so it's obviously impossible to get all of them. And then you just know that. And then for some reason, you're choosing which ones you get to make some overall shape it's just a shape that you're choosing and doesn't necessarily have other consequences that are not aesthetic. That seems like a hard thing to design, but like at least you would then be communicating that to people. And not just in word. Like one of the most annoying things in a game ever is like I'm playing Celeste early on, and it's got these like strawberries that you get that are like the hard. If you do the level the hard thing, you get the strawberry, or you can just get, and like nobody who's a real gamer is gonna like not try to get the strawberries, at least at the beginning. Eventually I stopped because like Celeste just hurts my hand because like I'm clamped down on the controller all the time, and I was like, I don't, but early on in the game, it just gives you some text like, it's okay to not want to get all the strawberries. Yeah. You're still a good person. And I'm just like, fuck you. Like, I just felt so condescended to and whatever, right? So it's hard. It's not easy. Even if that's really how you feel. What I heard about Celeste is that actually you do need to get all the strawberries. But I didn't finish the game. It's just a hard problem is all I'm trying to say there. It's not obvious. And so if you want to think about what game designers do at the higher skill levels, it's not just like how wide is this platform on this level and all. Like that is an important part of what we do all the time. But like we're often wrestling with these kind of really subtle issues that you wouldn't even necessarily think about as a player, right? And they're actually really important in terms of how do people feel about the game while they're playing it and after they play it and all that.
I have managed to find a couple of criticism of the demo.
Oh no. Okay.
I
love listening to internet criticism about what I did because of course internet criticism is so rare and hard to find that we must seek it out whenever we can find it for its valuable drops of wisdom. But go ahead.
Yeah, we need something for the John can blow up clip later.
Exactly. So in The Witness, I guess, people fell in love with the idea of being taught through the puzzle what's the mechanic. And after playing the demo, they were furious to see a tutorial saying how to push a rock.
I think I know the one guy. I think you're getting one guide because I know exactly which tweet you're referring to. So it was from this guy named Sander. I'm proving that I know who you're talking about. And here's what I'll say about that, actually. Is in different games we're doing different things. This tweet was about there's a screen where there's lines with 2 rocks and there's one line with like 1. And we say, hey, 2 rocks is too many for you, right? And he was like, oh, you took away the joy of discovery. And it's like, dude, believe me, in terms of designers who care about and think about the joy of discovery, I'm very high up on those rankings. You should understand that from my previous games, right? And then the other one, the same guy complained about, we have this temporary bitmap of like how strong you are when you walk in the strong beam and we show things. And he's like, oh, I could have discovered that. But so we're solving for different things, right? So like not every player is you. At the beginning of the game, we drop you through several characters, one of which can push a bunch of stuff, one of which can't push things. And all of this is very confusing. And it's like the basic foundations of the game. And it seems very important to me when the game is being very jarring like this to just help people understand, because otherwise they'll bounce off the game and won't see the actual good stuff later. Like, yes, we could let people have a little moment of discovery in the tutorial about like whether to push a rock or something, but that's like so small compared to all the other things in the game. It's like and it's something that you get in every other game. And so it's like, we're not worried about that. So the strong beam thing, again, is a similar situation where we're not so when the graphic comes up in Promise 1, we're not exactly solving for that, because I think we even have a character dialogue like, oh, I feel really powerful or something when I'm standing in this beam. But what we're actually solving for with that is something you don't see till way later in, like I said, we had playtesters who took a year to play the game. They 100%ed the game basically. And like there were things they didn't understand mechanically after playing 910 levels about how strength actually works. When you take the combination of the strength ability, and so just a very mild spoiler, all the characters have a different strength level, or not all of them, but there are multiple different attributes of how strong a character is, and the strong beam increments that attribute, right? And so to know how strong a character is right now, you have to have a clear idea of how strong they were, plus what the strength, and it's just too subtle. It's too subtle in a game with, like I said, the bigger a game gets, the harder it is to put everything together. And at some point, it's just, you can't expect people to reasonably do it. And it's not that important. Like what we want to do, we don't want the puzzle to be the mystery of what the strong beam does. We want the puzzle to be, given that this is the strong beam, what can I do with this? And what kinds of interesting situations happen? And so eliminating, this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, as you can tell. And so when I read internet criticism about it, I mean, it's fine. People can have, obviously, players are entitled to have whatever reaction they want. That's why they're the players. But you just got to understand, designers have thought about these things, and they may have a good reason for their decision, especially if, I mean, it's one thing if you play the whole game and you're like, okay, I still disagree. That's one thing. But like if you played the 6% of the game that is the tutorial and you're like, oh, this is totally wrong. It's like, well, there's a lot of game that may be the forcing function for some of these decisions that you haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I will.
That's what I would say there.
I will also defend the text prompt in the beginning about where it says you're not strong enough, or it's too much for you, because that like was actually very intriguing to me, because I was like, oh, they're like, well, who is it for then? And it got me wondering about that. So I thought it was like a good use of foreshadowing, and it was helpful too. But yeah, I don't think pushing a block is like an interesting discovery.
Yeah, exactly. It drops a hint that you might play as other characters that is paid off a little bit later. So yeah.
I have another one. I have another one which I found like extremely funny. This is the last one.
Yeah.
There was a moment where you Jonathan started sparring with somebody on the Twitter regarding
I love doing
clicking the button to move and holding it to move. And I was like, obviously it's a grid-based game, so you're supposed to click.
Well, that's not exactly what I would say.
I was holding it when I've seen something like, oh, you can click. It's like, oh, clicking makes sense. And I got to the promise part, which is like huge area. And like, now I would really love to just keep it held and then just sprint through the entire area.
Yeah.
What is like, if you give both abilities, right? Like to the player, is this the case of player is always right? Is this the case of we are supposed to have like one thing so that everybody knows what to do, or addressing everybody's needs? Like, how do you handle this from the design perspective?
There's a mixture, right? Okay, so I think there's a large degree of the player is always right is true here. However, player is always right is different from random guy on Twitter is always right, and we'll get into that in a minute. But like, if somebody is having a bad experience with the controls from your game, that is kind of your fault as a designer in some way, right? And so if it's like, so it isn't like this, but let's say I was like, well, you're supposed to tap, but we let you hold as like a secondary thing, then maybe we should say that in the tutorial or something. Like, you can you could imagine a tutorial room where we just say tap left 3 times and north 1 and you'll go to this exact spot, and then you realize you can buffer the moves or whatever. Similarly, with a D-pad on a controller and stuff. But one of the things that's happening as well is like, the demo's coming in super hot. We developed mainly on PC. We got our port to Switch 2 done, but porting a new engine to Switch 2 with a modern rendering API is like a ton of work, so our team had been working on that really hard for a long time. And then we went to show it in Los Angeles the other week, and I'm playing it a few days before, and I'm like, yeah, I don't like the analog stick responsiveness. It's like, it's a little too sluggish and it's a little too easy to miss squares and stuff. And there's very deep reasons for this, right? So, and this is what I was getting into in the Twitter thing is, it's a grid-based game. So first of all, your guy just has to stop on grid squares. And that just has a certain level of consequences, right? Like, and sometimes, I think in one of these particular cases, I was saying this to someone on Twitter, and I felt that this person didn't even have the cognizance to realize that, like, because this is a puzzle game, everything's at the center of a grid point all the time. And that just means you're not moving continuously around it. You can't compare that to a game where you're moving continuously around a 2D space and say they should feel the same, right? Like, those are different things. At the same time, before the demo came out, I was already thinking, like, well, I don't like the analog stick responsiveness, but that's a complicated thing to fix. It's a little bit scary because you can break puzzles if you change the movement code in a way that's like, so one of the things that we work very hard on, certainly I did months of programming, maybe 6 months of programming for this, I don't even know, is the puzzles all actually work, despite the fact that you're these characters moving continuously around the space. There's no timed stuff in the demo, but the thing that makes it hard is there are timed elements in the game that also can be happening, like, while you move and all of this. And you can't violate the puzzle logic. And that's actually really hard. And so, a lot of ideas that people might have for, like, movement also violate puzzle logic, but there's this complicated transaction system thing that I did that, like, enable us to do that. And actually, that's one of the things that I've been doing this week is the analog stick controls feel a lot better to me now for the general purpose case of walking around, which is 99% of what you're doing. And so that's something we continue to work on and stuff. But also, I mean, these are often very nitpicky comments from people who are just trying to be annoying or like, I don't know, or are that like, you can't listen to everybody. So the player is always right. But also, you can't listen to everybody because there's always somebody who's, like, so unreasonable.
Yeah, I think on Twitter specifically, there's, like, every permutation of, like, bad cake you could possibly have, and they're just all there.
Yeah, but that is, I will just say that we are continuing to work on controls because we do want these things to work better. So I can go because you're usually a technical podcast. We haven't been too technical today. But so this transaction system that I made, what does it do? It says when you issue a movement as a player, just, make sure that the consequences of that movement occur correctly, which means that if something else happens, like if I start pushing something and then somebody else pushes the thing another way, can that happen? What's the result and all that? And it depends is the answer, right? So it's a way of just, like, reifying those things into a place where gameplay code can, like, look at it and work all this stuff out. And where it works by default. Like, the puzzles will not break by default, but then you can, like, optimize for game feel. If you're going to take the risk of maybe we're going to write some complicated code and we hope we don't break the puzzles in rare cases by, like, allowing certain things to happen. So that's the thing at the core. But what that means, for example, is if you're in the middle of a square and you start walking left into the next square, let's say here's the border between squares. I start here and I'm going here. Let's actually go this way. We're going left to right in classic video game fashion. So I start here. I'm going here. when I start moving, a transaction is created, but I'm still physically in this square for the purpose of like any grid-based gameplay interaction. And then around the time when I cross the midpoint of the line, we commit the transaction, which means the objects of everything. So if I'm the warrior pushing 9 crystals in a row, all of them are in the previous square until I cross this, and then all of them change to the next square at the same time. And then you can have teleports and things falling and all that in the same transaction, and like it all happens. You don't have like race conditions between objects and whatever, right? Okay, but what that means, if I'm just, the reason for somewhat sluggish analog stick performance that I didn't like was, if I'm just walking and I want to turn, the minute I've crossed the midpoint of the square, I've started a new transaction that says I'm going into the next square. But it looks to me like I'm middle plus epsilon of the square, so obviously I should be able to go north, right? But in reality, if I was going east and then I wanted to turn north, I had to turn before the middle of the square, right? And so there's this invisible point where if you cross the point, it looks the same to you, but there's a moment at which it's slightly too late, and you're just caught in this next transaction, right? And so if you could learn that actually, right? And like, oh, I just have to turn a little early. Maybe my guy has some momentum or whatever. But I think it's just important to make that feel good. And so what I've been programming this week is these exceptions in the transaction system where it's like, okay, if you're mostly just walking or doing something simple and you turn, we let you, there's a bunch of things that actually you could do, right? So one problem is, okay, say I start, same case, I'm walking, but I'm going to push a crystal. That makes a scrape noise. So like, as soon as I start pushing it, we've sent the scrape noise to the audio. And like, do we cancel the audio if you turn and we revert the transaction? Or maybe we wait a little bit to play the scrape noise and give you some extra time. I don't know. Right now, we just say pushes are not subject to that same thing. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But this actually, so movement in this game is way more complicated than any game I've ever done because we have this requirement of, okay, we have this requirement that puzzle rules have to be inviolable, but we also have to violate them because we're like a higher production value game. So going back to the puzzle script games that we started with, objects basically teleport from square. There's no like continuous motion. In Promise there actually was, but it was continuous motion that was just cosmetic. Like it would just linear interpolate, but nothing could happen in the middle, right? But in the puzzle script games, it was just, I'm in this square and then punk, I'm in this square, right? And so there are situations that the level designers just never created in those games, I think. So if you let's say you have there's these lily pads that you could ride on, which are in the Skipping Stones world that you couldn't play in the demo, but you could see it in the trailer. It's the 4th world. And so you can ride them across water, right? And so you have one going left to right, and it's going from square to square, but it's linear interpolating. So it's moving smoothly, and you can get on it. And there's all this like transaction system stuff where it's like, so first of all, in the same category as like the control improvements I just talked about, like if a lily pad is in this square, but it's moving toward your square, you want to be able to get on it before it's actually in the position where you can get on it, because your movement takes time. And if you can't get on it till it's in the square, then you can only get on it late, and it makes it harder to play. So that's one issue. But another issue is, if you imagine this strict grid-based teleport thing, and you want to have a lily pad bridge where you go a few squares across the water to get to the other side, and one lily pad is going left to right, and the other is going right to left, okay? If they end up in the same column, you could walk across. But what if they're diagonal to each other, and they're never in the same column? They go from here to here, right? Then that never makes a bridge that you could walk. But, and that would be fine. Like in puzzle script, that would be like a funny, haha, isn't it? We're glitching the rules of the game to show something cool. But in this game, because everything moves continuously, there is a point at which they're visually right on top of each other. But they're actually still in different squares, and then they swap. And so we have rules in the movement about like, if you try to go in this like diagonal Lily case, we merge the player transaction with the Lily transaction so that because if you can move diagonally in the game, even secretly, then you could avoid, in theory, like getting killed by a monster or something. And so we merge the player transaction with the Lily transaction so that the player does move vertically, but because they all happen at exactly the same time, no rule is violated. Like there's all sorts of stuff behind the scenes that nobody has any idea about.
I like how it looks like from the outset. It's like, oh, it's 2D. It's 2D. It's 2D. Great. So like everything is simple. You just click a button.
It's so not simple. When we release the engine, this is going to be one of the funny things is we're going to release the engine. Most people are not going to want this complicated movement system. And I'm going to write a really big comment about how you probably don't want this complicated movement system. But it's going to be in there because I don't think we're going to like cut it out. And so, and also somebody, if they want to make a game like this, they might want that. But, man, it's a lot of programming. That's all. But all these things, and so if you play a game like this, or really a lot of games, and you're like, why isn't it just some other way? It might be that the developer is a doofus and just isn't doing a good job, but it might be that there's actually really deep reasons behind why things are the way they are.
I think in the same way so many Unreal Engine games have like the same WASD first-person character controller with like the floaty jump and everything, because everybody starts with the template project. I think we're going to get a ton of Sokoban games that are just people like use it by default and they don't, and then they'll try to make like an action game with the Sokoban movement.
So the plan is to release the engine that was used for the Order of the Sinking Star, like an entire game, or
well, so what we're going to do, I mean, we haven't actually done this, so we'll see, but I think we're just going to refactor our source code so that we can just delete a certain set of files and distribute you the rest, and it won't have a lot of the specifics of our particular game, because we don't want someone releasing our own game on iOS like next week or whatever because we put out the engine. So it won't have that, and it won't have all the graphics because, most of the download size is like graphical assets and stuff, but it'll have a little bit, it'll have enough that you see how this works and, could do it yourself or whatever. And it'll be a playable game. It just won't be super interesting. Like, hey, I mean, it might be like the warrior in a few levels where he could push the blocks around and win the level. And we would have some maybe just straight up levels from the game.
With the tutorial message that you're strong enough to push more than one.
Make sure that's in there. But it'll be something like that where it's not most of the complexity of our specific gameplay, but if you wanted to make your own game, it's a fully running. So programmers will know this, right? Like the difference, and maybe this is also why people like vibe coding so much now, is like the difference between I have something that's already working and I can just like mess with it to make what I want to happen. That's way better than like, well, if the code is reasonable, it's way better than like, I'm starting from square zero. I have to make everything. And then someday I'll get to the part where I get to do the cool thing that I wanted to do, right? And so that's the goal with releasing the engine, is it'll be a cool game where you can walk around and it'll have the editor, it'll have all these things, and then you can just, I mean, probably not that many people realistically will use it because people don't program engines anymore, but we're going to hope that some people...
You mentioned already a couple of times... What are the platforms that Order is planning to release on?
There's a lot of future platforms in discussion. What is certain and what has been announced right now is just Steam and Switch 2. People can imagine other platforms where they would like to play the game, and some of those may happen, some may not happen.
Okay. No one knows at this point.
You got to give the platform itself the opportunity to make a special announcement. So
That's true, although some platforms are not that interested in working with indies these days, so there's that as well.
That's also true.
Yeah.
You got to reserve, the possibility for that.
Yeah, and so for people who are not necessarily totally in the developer scene, but who know a little bit about this, right? So like Nintendo had a State of Play show, for example, that we were not in, but we thought we might be in it, and so we were sort of saving that for the Switch 2 announcement. But then we got invited to do this other thing, and it was like they were like, "Oh, the requirement for this show in Los Angeles was that you had to be announced before the show." And we were like, "Okay." So we changed the way our announcement was going to work. But generally, if you're going to announce that your game's on a platform, being in one of these shows, it's a little bit better because, like, it helps spread the word about the game, and it helps people. Every console, for example, has players who are especially invested in that console and really like it, and it helps tell those people about your game. And so I don't know that there will be any more of those this year, but it is in general, as Billy said, it's in general a tactic that you would look for as an indie developer, is to get in those.
What in the game might change after the demo?
Well, like I said, we're still working on the controls. We're going to have better frame rates on low-end platforms, probably better frame rates on high-end platforms too, but the playability on low-end platform is something that we're working on. And when I say low-end platform, I mean like really low. As we mentioned, it is playable on Steam Deck. Steam Deck in 2026 is really kind of low-end. It's not a powerhouse. But we have some people playing on like a GeForce 1050 or whatever, which is like a GPU from 12 years ago or something, or 10 years ago. And, just making sure that we run on those. And then, on platforms like Steam Deck that we run better with so either better frame rate or, using less battery. Because if you're trying to game on your Steam Deck, you would like to be able to game for longer. So those are among the top concerns. Content-wise, the story is still changing a lot because I'm trying to like globally solve for something across the whole game, and so a lot of it will get rewritten. Of course, in the demo, not all the roles were cast for voice acting, and so that's something that will happen. We'll have full voice in the final game for everything. Most of the puzzles that you see are going to stay, and like the overworld that you saw is basically locked down, and it might change by like a square or two. Actually, we changed some stuff that's like 5 squares of terrain or whatever, but simplified some things. And so nothing too dramatic. Most of the main work that we have to do gameplay wise and all that is in parts of the game that are way later and people haven't seen.
There are a couple of questions regarding the design, which I think will be a bit deep and will then like the deep discussion will follow again. So how are we doing on time on your end, folks?
I've got time.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a question about determining the difficulty of the puzzles. And I would like to combine it with something you mentioned, Jonathan, before. Like if somebody is spending more work during the puzzle, he or she should be rewarded with more stuff. And to me, these things are intertwined, like the difficulty and then the reward. But actually, what even is the reward? Like, is this an achievement sometimes? Is this like a bigger unlock of something in the world? Like what levers do you have in such a game, like Order of the Sinking Star, what you can reward player with? And yes, so all of that.
We do have like Steam achievements in the game. I've never really been a fan of that kind of a thing. But we do it, I think, because there is like the metagaming aspect of you can see if your friends did certain things, or you can see, you can see if like the general player base got so far or whatever. But I do think the more Animal Well style of like, we represent what you did somewhere central in the game is more rewarding, and it just has more integrity. Like, you can slap an achievement on anything, right? And so we're not very achievement centric. Because it's a big game, I forget how many we have. I'm going to say there's like around 30, which is a lot. But it's because the game's so big. They don't tend to be tied to individual levels. They tend to be tied to bigger accomplishments within the game that I don't want to exactly spoil right now. But as you work through the game and you're solving stuff, there's like bigger things. So like in The Witness, for example, there was one achievement per like big gold box laser that you would do that represented that you finished this area. And it's not quite like that here, but it's approximately like that. And there's just 30 something because it's a much bigger game. What was the rest? There was something else.
Because it was difficulty and then the rewards.
Yeah, difficulty and rewards. Yeah. Well, okay. So there was a game or a book that went around a lot. I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago in game design circles. I'm not sure if I would recommend this book these days because I think a lot of psychology is questionable. But there's a book called Punished by Rewards by a guy named Alfie Kohn, and it's a more of like an educational system kind of a thing. And he looks at all these cases where, so he categorizes rewards as extrinsic or intrinsic, right? And extrinsic is essentially like, I'm going to pay you money if you do this thing, but maybe it's not money. Maybe it's achievements. Maybe it's like, whatever. I'm going to give you something outside the game for doing this. And intrinsic rewards are like, the game itself, within the way the game works, recognizes your progress. And, the case that he makes is that extrinsic rewards are basically demotivating and make things less fun because people are just doing the things to get the extrinsic reward, which ultimately is kind of hollow, right? And intrinsic rewards tend to be more enjoyable and tend to make the thing that they're involved with like deeper, because it's more like just an extra aspect of this interactive system that you have. And so if people are interested, I recommend checking out the book. Like I said, I don't know what I would think about it in 2026 overall, but it's a good mental model to have. And it's the way that I think about things. Like, I don't want to bribe people to play my game. I want them to play the game because it's good, And in fact, when you start leaning too much on these kind of extrinsic rewards, you end up making the game less good because you're taking the energy of the game and pointing it at something outside the game. You're pointing it at something shallower and worse than the game. Like, achievements are my list of achievements on Steam is a very shallow thing that, to the extent it has value, it's my memories of what I did in the game to get that thing. So I'm not very achievement centric, but it is a very big game, and when things are bigger, they kind of need a different structure, I'm not sure if I know how to explain this without going into a big analogy, but like, let's say you had a game that's 10 levels, and every time you play a level, your feeling of progress was like 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10. Because it's only 10, like, that structure works because you're like, oh, I'm getting close. I'm getting palpably closer with each increment. And every puzzle is meaningful because I only need 10 of them or whatever, right? When it's 1,000, that structure doesn't work, right? Who cares that I did 557 and I was on 556 a minute ago, right? And so there's just different, for people to feel progress and for people to feel even just understand what the game is giving them to play and lay it out in their mind in an appropriate way, we do a lot of things. So some of that you already see in the demo, actually. There's two major things that you can observe in the demo. One is it's not just four worlds coming together and you play the puzzles, but it's all laid out spatially, right? So one level is this direction, one level is this direction. And for people who played the later parts of the demo, when they combine, that happens in the quadrant that these two cardinal directions have in common, right? And so the whole game is laid out like that, and that helps you, when you look at the overhead map, it helps you understand where have I made progress, where haven't I? And if you go to the southwest, you know what ideas you're going to encounter there, even if you haven't played the levels, at least generally, because you've learned that that's how the game works, right? And then these gold rooms that you visit, one of them, those are laid out in a similarly orchestrated manner. And that structure both, it helps you organize, but it also gives you a feeling of progress. So in the demo, you do the gold room, you unlock this little thing that you don't quite know what it is, but it's a golden, like one of these sign objects, and you see a little meter. And you find that if you solve these bigger levels, you start filling up the meter, right? And so filling up an individual meter is a sense of progress. But then when you solve it, you can't solve it in the demo because there's not enough levels. But when you do in the real game, something very concrete happens. And then that process that you do there is actually repeatable in every quadrant. Actually, there's, math time. There's 4 worlds. 4 choose 2 is 6, right? So 6 is the number of ways that you can combine 4 worlds together. And so there's that many of these, like, I'm going to say quadrant again because that's the word I've been using, but there's that many combination areas that you might work through. And so after you do it once or twice, you see like, oh, this is how this works. And then that structure makes sense to you. Like, oh, I did one combination area, so I can do the same thing down here. And instead of individual puzzles, the individual puzzles are progress toward a big star, and the big stars are progress toward filling up the meter of big stars, and filling up the meter of big stars is is a step in getting the number of combination areas that you need to get to the end game. And so it's a multi-tiered structure, is what I would say.
I don't want you to answer the question, but I am excited to figure out if I get to like the corners of the map and if they wrap around. If there's ever a point where...
Anyway, what else do we want to talk about today?
Billy, do you have any comment on the rewards system / difficulty management of the puzzles before we move on?
Yeah, Steam achievements specifically was something I also felt like kind of conflicted about, and I almost feel like there's just a lot of people that have an unhealthy relationship with achievement systems, and in a way they're kind of like drug addicts, like they need them, and if you do anything to like frustrate their access to them, they will like lash out at you. So I was careful to not like tie any achievements to like layer 3 kind of secret unfair things in the game, and I wanted them to be like pretty reasonable to get to. So yeah, that, and then yeah, they are kind of like, yeah, definitely extrinsic motivation, and I don't know, there's like a little, and I think there's still a tiny bit of value in like seeing the achievement pop up sometimes. Like you really have to think carefully about how it's going to show up in game and how that will affect like the tone. Like I'm thinking about I don't know if I want to spoil it, but in Tears of the Kingdom, and I think this may be kind of an intentional joke, but when you beat that game, you see and it's like a very dramatic moment, and the music swelling, but then it says like quest complete or something like in the middle of the screen, like in kind of the standard like side quest complete way. And in that case, I think it is intentional. And it's kind of a funny joke, but I remember playing like Alan Wake 2, and there's like plenty of moments where that game is like very self-serious, and I was like, the achievement pop-ups just like kept coming, and they were like very distracting. So, but otherwise, if you like time it right, and you already are knowing you're kind of doing something important, and giving them a pop-up can feel okay. But yeah, I think generally you want to like reward people with something that is either like unintrusive, or it like unlocks new gameplay mechanics and gives them something to play with, and like is like a meaningful addition to the game. Like giving them more game to play is, I feel like, always a good reward if they like the game.
Hopefully they do, if they are already in the game playing experience. When I discussed this with a couple of people, some of them were hesitant to play the demo, to play the game on the release to get like full experience. What is your mindset, Jonathan, about this? Is it something like the full release is the proper release and the demo is a sort of an early access way of experiencing it, or is there something that people are missing out when they play demo?
I don't think so. I mean, like I said, the story will change a little bit, maybe a lot in some places, but the story, even though I said earlier how much I'm working on the story, it is not the main point of the game. The main point of the game is the gameplay and the ideas that are embedded in the gameplay, and those are basically finalized. Like, I think we talked about tweaking one puzzle out of the 105 that are in the demo, and I'm not sure if we're going to. But at the same time, I also understand if people, if people want to wait for the full game, that's great. I think that makes sense. So the whole Steam Next Fest is kind of weird to me, actually, in some way, because on the one hand, it's all these demos that you can play for free, right? All you got to do is download them. And you look at the player numbers for these, like even the most popular games in Next Fest, and they're a small fraction of who would buy that game. I mean, you never quite know because the game's not released yet, but if you would predict like how many people I think would buy this game, the number of people who play the demo is actually a pretty small fraction of that. And so that's interesting. It's maybe a lot of people actually have this opinion. Look, I'm just going to wait for the full game, or maybe they just don't know that there's all these demos or something. I don't know what it is, but it's just not a rare thing, I guess, is what I would say. And I just, however people want to play, I think this is a case where the player is always right. Like however they want to do things is fine, including if they want to if they want to look on YouTube and get the answer to every puzzle and ruin the game for themselves. Like, obviously, that's not what I'm designing for. I actually don't have any countermeasures about that in this game. No obvious ones. So in The Witness, there's a countermeasure where toward the end of the game, for the first ending, there's a door with 2 randomly generated puzzles on it, and you actually have to know the mechanics because they're timed. And so you can't look them up. You have to understand how this works. And I got a number of angry people, like, who were upset that they couldn't solve the puzzles, and I'm like, look, this is just what you did. In this game, there's nothing like that, but it is the case. So sometimes in classic puzzle games of this sort, there'll be like a level name that pops up as you go into the level. I kind of don't like that sometimes because sometimes the level name spoils the idea of the level for you, and we talked about it for this game, and we just felt like there would be a lot of mediocre level names if you need 900 level names, so we didn't do it. But the benefit of that also is it's not easy for people to say on forums what level they're giving you the solution for. You have to at least like maybe look at the screenshot or say, this is the level on this screen that's number 3 or whatever. So maybe that'll make it harder. I don't know. People will just ask AI now. They'll just give it the screenshot and say, how do I solve this?
On the Braid website, there was like this statement, right? Like, Don't do this. You will ruin your experience. You know, this game is designed for you to uncover this. Like, don't do it. How idea rich is the story relative to the game itself, and how much of the refinement is figuring out what to tell versus refining what's there?
It's both. It's a really hard form of writing because, well, there's two. So the audio logs are actually the easier form because that's a classic video game thing that you understand. But then with the characters saying stuff in the levels, it's supposed to be like they say one or two sentences, and then this adds up over time to like something that you understand, and that can be difficult. It's very easy to like write a little too much, and then you're sitting there listening to it and being like, I don't necessarily need to hear all this. That's true for audio logs as well, actually. And so that's one of the things is I keep finding ways to trim it down. And then, you know, it's just challenging because of the volume of stuff to do, right? Like, always the less that you have to focus on and look at, the easier it is to do these things. But then in terms of the ideas from the story, okay, so one of the things that happened a little earlier in story development was I was like, look, it's a Sokoban game. People aren't going to want to play a Sokoban game. So you need to have like some kind of classic story format that is, you know, will hold people's attention or whatever. I had kind of this, I was at least going to try to do this like slightly more traditional functional thing of like, oh, this one is like the coming of age story about the guy trying to prove himself and whatever his issues are and that and all that. And I didn't like it, first of all, so it wasn't going to be good. But also, it just didn't really fit the format of the game in multiple ways. But the worst one was any kind of, so even traditional story or not, right? But any kind of story that's injecting a bunch of ideas that have nothing to do with the gameplay at all is actually distracting you from the ideas in the gameplay in this game that's carefully laid out to communicate all these ideas. So you're actually adding noise into the communication stream in some way. And maybe a little bit of noise is fine. Like maybe like, oh, I'm getting a feeling of this character, and even if what they said right now matters later, I don't understand that yet, but it's at least giving me the sense of the character and making it a little bit more of a cool little dude that I'm moving around or whatever. But like at some point, if you're saying too much, you're like just making the game worse. That's why, so in The Witness, that's why it's mostly a quiet game, is because especially in that game, the aesthetic of the gameplay, I think, really needed quietness for the most part. This game's different. I don't think it needs quietness as much. But that is something I'm trying to balance, is how do we get the information across, and how do we do it in a way that is hopefully not damaging, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really hard problem. I think it worked well enough for the demo, but it's something that I'm constantly trying to improve.
Yeah, it's also probably like a difficult thing to test because you wrote the story, you know the game mechanics, so if those things are like overlapping, it doesn't really bother you because you kind of are just going through it. But like for like a new player, they like really want to hear what the dialogue's saying, and then they're also like it's all new to them on screen. So
yeah.
Like,
well, and there's just different kinds of players, right? So for sure, I think for most people, it's better to have characters who say some stuff. How much stuff they should say and whatever is a knob you could turn. But I even have a friend who like texted me and was like, you should take out all the voice lines, or you should let me, you should at least let me turn them off as a player, which we're going to do in the final game, because I don't want to hear any of this. I just want to solve the puzzle. And like, I kind of get it, but also at the same time, it's like you would be missing a significant dimension of the game because all this stuff does add up to something in the end that does contribute to the core idea of the game. So I don't know, but you know, you can't please everybody, so you just got to do the best that you can.
In the game, the UI, the HUD, that is typically like accompanied in all the other games, pretty much is non-existent. There is no number saying like, 7 out of 15 for this area, right? This seems to be a very deliberate choice. What is the motivation behind it?
I mean, I've always had this sensibility of wanting to be just deliberate and clear and not have a lot of extraneous stuff, which doesn't necessarily translate to HUD or no HUD, right? So like Braid, you go into a level and it has HUD of like the puzzle pieces that you have there or whatever. But it's just a core background sensibility, and I just try to apply that. So for example, with the meters that you fill up with the stars, you can go check that by looking at the sign, but you do it by looking at the sign. It's not on your screen all the. It does pop up when you solve it for a second, just to provide that information, but then it goes away. There is one place where we still have HUD, which is in the promise how many gems you have.
Yeah.
We draw it in the corner. Mm-hmm. And it's because I try to do it eidetically. Like on the character, you can see how many gems there are.
Yeah,
and
I noticed that later, and it was like, but it was after like 45 minutes or something. I'm like, they're all on his back. That's a really cool detail.
Well, it's subtle, but it's also like sometimes you have very specific numbers of gems that you want to know that you have. Like 12 for a certain point you need to know, and then 20 at the very end. And well, maybe it's 12, maybe it's 10, I don't remember. But it's annoying to look at the guy and count any number more than like 5, right, of how many you have. And so I think we just punted and used HUD in that case because we don't want it to be something people are expending mental energy on. And so like I actually it takes a lot of work to be like, hey, we've got this character mesh and it's got all these sockets on it where the gems know where to go as you pick them up and they animate smoothly into there. And like, so, we tried, but it's just not as, that's sort of modeled after these games, like going back to Dead Space or whatever, where your health meter was sort of like on the character's back. But that's a much easier thing to read because it's one piece of information that's like a scalar, right? But differentiating between the integers 11 and 12 is like harder than that, right? And it just doesn't work as well.
I'm really excited for the sort of the parody video that's going to get posted to YouTube. That's like, if Order of the Sinking Star was made by Ubisoft or whatever, and then it's going to have like the constant presence of the HUD that says like 1 out of 1,000 puzzles solved, and it's going to remind you the whole game. And
yeah, I'm a fan of the 3D Mario video that went, or the AAA Mario, sorry.
I don't know if I've seen this one.
You haven't seen AAA Mario? Oh, it's good. It's really good.
How did the recording of the music go?
Well, that's all happening in Europe, far from where I am. If it were close by, I would have traveled to be on site. But really, the musicians are just handling that. And I think it's been going very well. So, in the demo, I think we had a relatively small amount of, recently recorded orchestral music. A lot of what's been recorded is still being, edited and put into the game. And then we have at least one more session where we're going to go record more. But so that's another thing that, I don't know, if people are really picky about their music and they want to hear the full organic human version, then that'll be in the final release.
Yeah, okay. The music's like really, really good, by the way. Like it passed the test where I was able to like pause the game and kind of forget that the game was paused, and the music did not annoy me as I.
Yeah, that was one of the criteria actually. Sometimes, so for the most part, I don't know that like the game developers conference is very valuable to me anymore or whatever. I think it's good for beginners. But there's always things, you go there for years and like one thing sticks with you, right? And I just always remember someone was giving a speech about audio, or maybe this was even in a written article actually, but it was like there's the there's like the kid test where like you just have a kid play the game and you go into the next room so that you're not engaging with the game at all. And you just listen to how annoying are the sounds and music, and does it drive you crazy if it's going for like 20 minutes? And that's just a useful image to have when you're figuring out how to design these things and direct these things. And that was definitely at play, but like, I don't, I'm not very knowledgeable in music. So Peter Dew did all the composition, and then Martin Stig Anderson, did some of the early work and is also helping manage it and stuff. And they're just handling it, and it's going really well. I do have some higher level feedback once in a while that I give to them, and that they've been very good at making happen in a good way. But yeah, the music's nice. A lot of people have said, I'm surprised actually by the number of people who said they like the music and want the soundtrack, because it is kind of not traditional video game themes, right? It's a little more ambient. It's a little more setting mood than giving you a very specific melody to enjoy right now. You know what I mean? But people like that. So
yeah, I think it works
great.
really, really well for like needing to solve a puzzle and think. Like, you don't want the music to like have momentum or like a direction. You don't want there to be like a sort of a narrative arc to the music you're listening to if you're just going to be like sitting in one place staring at the screen.
Yeah, that was one of the early, that was one of the early design rules about the music, and I had to come back later and be like, well, I don't think we did a good enough job here and there. Is this exact thing where if you're just listening to music alone and you want it to be entertaining, it has these moments where like now the instruments come in really strong and dun whatever, and we're like, no, there's none of that in this because it's gonna just distract you. Like, you're trying to think, man, and so. Yeah, but I think it's working out really well at this point.
Yeah,
so,
and the sound effects are also like pretty top tier. Like, I was appreciating how almost like every little interaction had a unique sound. When you're walking through the beams, there's like really satisfying, like kind of lightsaber whooshing. And just like every little interaction was kind of like answered with a sound effect.
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe reductive, but the rule that I go in with about this is that if there's meaningful gameplay state change, then there should be a sound, right? Mm-hmm. And the sound it communicates it to people, but it also just makes the gameplay state change feel less invisible and feel more acknowledged and feel cooler. And so, yeah, when you're standing in a beam, that's different than when you're outside a beam, because the beam is imparting something to you, and it really should have sound. And you just follow that throughout the game. And the thing is, with a modern game, there really are a lot of little gameplay state things that happen. And if you just put sounds on all of them, even if they're like not good sound effects, like, so for Braid originally, I think it was soundrangers.com was one of the sites that's still up, and there was some other site where you buy a sound effect for like 99 cents, and it's like some really generic thing. And like, I did the whole game with those sounds, and it was way better than without sounds, of course. But like, for the final game, we even didn't change some of them that much, because the thing that matters most is the reactivity to state change, and just getting the general mood of the sound right, I think, is the next thing.
Yeah, I will even say sounds indicating state change is helpful to the player, but I've recently been noticing more and more that it's actually helpful to get sounds in early, because it could help you debug like problems in the game, because like in a way they're like little audio breakpoints of like variables can be changing if there are sounds hooked up. And
if something is happening every frame accidentally and it's making a sound every time, you'll know really fast.
So the computer's screaming for help.
Yeah.
There were people asking about playtesters, whether you still need them, John, and
I don't think we do. I mean, we've had playtesters. The thing is, it's a really big game. It takes a long time to play through. If we start playtesters now, most of them probably aren't, because we said the game is going to launch in 2026. So they would have at most 5 months. And if they took 5 months, we couldn't use any of the information from their playtest, So Oh my God, it was shipping in 2026. It's so scary. Yeah. Anyway.
How did you go about playtesting in general? What did you look for? How did you
I'm not
structure
that
them?
big of a playtest guy, to be honest.
Okay.
We have had, because this game's so big and it's so hard to see the whole thing in my head at once, we've done more playtesting. And the form that took is, well, so we have the team playing the game once in a while, just because if you're going to work on a game, you should understand the game. And you would be shocked by the number of people who like don't really want to do that in general. And then it's just like, look, I'm sorry, you can't work on this game if you're not going to do that. So that's like the first line of like, oh, this is broken, or, you know, whatever. But then, you know, we did have people play the full game as a playtest, and at least two of those people later became designers on the game. So Patrick Traynor was the first playtester, probably, I think, and he played through a much earlier version of the game, like 3 years ago, and then he came on to help design. He did Patrick's Parabox, which is a very good game, and Linelith, that's actually Linelith is my favorite game of his. It's like a smaller game that he has on Steam. It's really good though. It's a weird name because there's some other game that has almost the same name that I forget what it is. But anyway, so he did that. Matthew Van Devender, who did Taiji and all that, he play tested recently, and then came on to help with design a few months ago. And we've had several other playtesters, but the number of playtesters who have played through the whole game who were not on the development team when they did that is like a single digit number. And it's like, it's probably around 5 or 4, like, is the number. And so part of it, you just have to bridge the rest of that gap with just being a serious designer and like trying to understand the experience and trying to make sure it's good. And that's always been the way that I do it. Now, Patrick, he much more has been leaning on, I think we need playtesters and stuff. And so, you know, different people have different opinions about this. But it's just so hard ergonomically to get people to playtest this game because it's so big. But then, you know, we released the demo and we have 100,000 playtesters all of a sudden, right? And it worked pretty well. You know, like I said, there's a few things we might tweak, but for the most part, it actually went better. If you were to ask me, like, what would our ratings have been in all this, I probably would have picked lower because it's a weird game genre and because it's a new engine and all this stuff. But it all went really well. And so that's part of the reason why the demo's still up, because it was so successful. You know, so Valve, when they put out this page of like, here's the top games from NextFest, and so they want to link the demo from that page, and so that's one reason we didn't take it down. But then, I mean, if a bunch of people are playing it every day and you're getting like thousands of wishlists a day just from leaving the demo up, like, why wouldn't you leave it up? And so we might leave it up a long time. There's an open question of how long, but it'll probably be at least a couple weeks past today. I don't know. We'll see.
There's also the idea that there's a deadline after which the demo is no longer available helps for a push to actually do it. If you have the demo will be for 2 months, it's like, I still have time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, it was nice to have a lot of people asking us not to take it down, but we did intend to take it down because you also just, I don't know, like, why would anyone buy your thing if it's not that hard to come by or whatever? But, you know, when Valve sent out the email and said, don't take your demo down, we were like, all right.
Gabe said,
but I also like it. Like, you know, it's very motivating when you work this hard on something for a long time. It's like not real, you know? Like, this game is just a thing that's on your computer and nobody else knows what it is, and nobody else... You're working on all these tweaky, subtle things about the game design that are just like something out of the corner of your mind from somewhere, and they kind of don't matter in a certain way. It's just that you have faith that somebody will eventually play this, right? And then now, once you finally have people playing it, all that changes. It's like real now, and I think that's really motivating. I mean, I've definitely released games before, so it's not as big of a factor for me, but there's definitely people on the team where it's like, oh, this is my hard work is turning into something that people enjoy, and that's really good, you know.
There are people in the chat that say that like in 3 weeks they would have the entire game beat. So if you want like speed playtesters, people in the chat are very confident.
So I will say, so on the one hand, we had people who took a year. We did have a guy who did it in like 3 weeks. And he was on vacation for like one of those weeks and didn't play, right? So, but he's like one of the fastest puzzle people in the world. The dude's just like completely insane. So it is possible, but I don't think, probably most people in chat probably wouldn't be able to do it in 3 weeks, is all I'm saying. It's not a regular sized puzzle game, guys. It's really, really, you know, you're talking about, if we count the overworld puzzles as puzzles, there's like, you know, 12 to 1,400. You're talking about 400 puzzles a week, right? So divide that by 7. What is that? That's 60 puzzles a day consistently. That's a lot. That's a lot, especially as you get into the later game when they're hard.
Okay, we are slowly exiting the demo area. There's one sort of deep question to you both, guests. Is there? Do you have any final remarks on the demo itself?
I normally don't play demos, and so I did it, you know, because of the stream. So it was, but I think demos kind of they offer an interesting look at like a game before it's ready, and you kind of, you know, thinking that it was going to be timed and that after last weekend it was going to turn into a pumpkin and disappear. I was kind of excited to like see if there were like placeholder things in the game, and you know, kind of have this opportunity to see, get this like kind of inside look at an early exclusive version of it. But yeah, normally I'm the type of player that, you know, I want to dim the lights, get my glass of water and like really kind of focus on it. Especially, you know, I'm a giant fan of your games, John. Like we were talking shit about achievements earlier, but the Witness was one of the only games I got a platinum trophy on in PlayStation. So I was like really looking forward to like having that experience again. But yeah, I was happy to still play the demo and kind of do things
right
differently.
On. Thanks for the nice comments. I mean, the platinum in The Witness was actually pretty fun because we were like, look, this is actually kind of ridiculous to get. It's not so ridiculous that it's not like it's impossible, but it's like you have to be good at the game to get this, right? And so it was pretty fun to do from that standpoint, but you know, that doesn't make sense in every game. So like in this game, the equivalent gameplay thing that you would have done in The Witness to get the platinum, it just doesn't make sense in this game. And so we don't have an equivalent of that. At the same time, there is like, you're kind of going on a big epic Odyssey, not the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan, but like something else. Like by the time you get to the end of the game, it should feel very rewarding in a game that, in a way that smaller games can't. And so, yeah, I mean, every game's different, so we'll see. Do I have any comments about the demo? I'm just going to say, I mean, thanks everybody for the really great reception. Like I said, if I had been asked to predict how it would go, I would have predicted mildly to moderately positively, but there would be all kinds of problems. And there really weren't that many problems, and everybody likes it. And it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy that a Sokoban game, of course, we don't use the word Sokoban. We do use the word Sokoban later, but we don't use it in the demo or anything. That it's one of the top demos, and that's great. And it just does. I mean, okay. I do not want anyone out there to ever make a game for 10 years because it is a long time. If I had known, I probably wouldn't have done this project, right? But at the same time, when you put in that kind of effort, it is really gratifying to see that people noticed that this is good in some way and they appreciate it, right? And so even though, so there are things in the demo that are not done. So like the little level entry stars on the overworld are kind of ugly and temporary, and they glow in a stupid way after you solve them, and it looks bad. And like, we're going to hopefully have time to fix all that stuff. But, you know, all that stuff is peripheral to the core of the game, which is like, what are the puzzles? Are they interesting? Are they enjoyable? And I'm glad that people think that they are, because actually the game only gets more interesting the further that you go. Because in the beginning, we're setting things up, right? We're like, do you even know who the thief is and how she works? No. So we have to give you some simple scenarios where you figure these things out. And then, you know, later in the game is where the core purpose of the game starts to really happen, which is when everything starts happening all together. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's great that people like the beginning, because I think it means they'll like the people who play further will like the later things more.
I had so much fun playing the demo. And I have heard from a couple of people, I think even Casey tweeted like, this is not my style of game, but I enjoyed it. And I think this is like when you hear like Sokoban, unlimited puzzles, you might get afraid of like, you know, like what's gonna happen. Like, I don't want to like stay in front of the computer and remain there thinking. But this is such a fun game. Like, the progression feels so nice for a puzzle game. It's the typical puzzle game where you're like, hey, I need to stop and think. Like, it's almost sort of inbuilt in this like fun experience of going through the puzzles and beating them one after another. It was awesome.
Yeah, the day after finishing the demo, I was like kind of wanting to play it the next morning, and then I had the realization that it was just a demo, and I was sad.
I was like, I knew I should wait. Wait for the entire game.
Well, we're doing our best to get the game done for you. Man, there's still a bit to do, but yeah.
We have two questions.
Yes.
And we're gonna close afterwards. I think Twitch stream died. The YouTube is still up. I have zero control over it. Okay. Beyond Order of the Sinking Star. As we know, this is actually a fourth game John has been working on. Will we hear anything about the secret third game before 2030? So a good timeline.
Okay. So the secret third game uses the same engine and the same programming language, so we don't have to spend a bunch of time building those. And it even probably uses the same art style, because the secret third game has the same kind of perspective. And so a lot of just all these art direction questions and how do you make things look good and how do the characters move and all that map directly to this. And so we shouldn't have to spend that long figuring those things out. So before 2030, yes. How soon before 2030? Of course, I mean, if I make a promise, it's going to be hard to keep. So I would just like that to be a surprise for people. But I'm hoping it's not that long, honestly. The other thing about the secret third game is the plan the whole time was for it to be modular, in the sense that... So I really liked what Edmund Macmillan kind of accidentally did with Binding of Isaac. So when he originally released it, it was a kind of a simple game. And I think it was actually like not quite interesting enough to like be that fun for a lot of players. It was a little too simple. But then he released an expansion and he released an expansion. And after the first expansion or two, it just reached this critical threshold where now a bunch of people were interested, and it just took off. But Binding of Isaac, I mean, it's one of the biggest indie games ever now. But when it first came out on Steam, it was like, you know, probably moderately successful, but it wasn't like a big hit or anything, right? And it's just he added to it until it got to a point where it was super interesting. And so, you know, I'm thinking about this game in that way, where I mean, we would want the first like module or whatever to be interesting enough that it doesn't feel it's missing anything, but then add to it over time as opposed to, you know, spending a ton of time before you see any of it. Will that actually work? I'm not sure, because the thing about game design is you got to get deep into the game and really think about how all these individual issues play out. And I haven't done that for this game on a few of the fronts yet, because it's not the main game. So we'll see. But yeah, hopefully. I'm not going to say.
Can you say like four adjectives about the game?
No, because it'll give it away what it is. I don't want anyone to know what it is. No, okay. It's fun. It's really fun. That's an adverb and an adjective.
Okay. So then the last question for both guests: what has been your experience developing creative confidence? How do you balance the how of the game dev with the why?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking about this yesterday, because like I feel like I feel like when you're young and you haven't really made things for other people, you're kind of just following your gut instinct, and maybe, you know, the stuff is bad and cringy, and but you just have this like inner urge to make it, and you're not thinking too hard about the outside world. But then if you have an audience in mind that can, and you're developing for them, that in a way now you're, you know, using that experience to guide like what you make, and that could be like both good and bad. So it's like as I like continue working, I'm trying to keep both of those sort of things in mind of making the weird creative thing that's just driven by like your intuitive impulses, but then also designing for like people's expectations, or trying to subvert those expectations, or, you know, it's kind of hard not to think about how, you know, things will be received. But yeah, it's a weird thing that I'm always feeling different about depending on the day.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say about this, that kind of question is always a little bit alien to me in some way, because I'm not that worried. I mean, in general, I have a somewhat contrarian personality. So, like, I don't mind if I believe a different thing than a lot of people believe. In fact, that makes a contrarian special, right? Or something. Actually, contrarianism is like, you know, not a very good philosophy, generally speaking, because then you're just reacting to everything and not acknowledging what's good. But it's just to say that I've never been that much of like, you know, liking what everyone else likes and all that. And then when it comes to games specifically, like, I have really high standards for myself, and I think really hard about things. And so by the time something comes out that I worked on, it's like, dude, I agonized over so many small issues that people have no idea about, right? So like some of these technical things we talked about, there are equivalent design things that are really sometimes really subtle, sometimes not. But you know, so by the time the game comes out, I know how good it is. And then if people don't agree for some reason, then I'm going to be like, well, you just don't see what's good about it. Maybe part of that is my fault because I didn't do a good enough job showing you what's good about it. But it's not like it's not good. Like, I wouldn't have put it out if it wasn't good, right? So I just, if I release a game and people think it's bad, which actually, I mean, I've had these hit critically acclaimed games, but like, it's the internet, right? So you can find an infinite number of people saying it's a terrible game that's stupid, right? So this always happens with every game, is that people think it's bad. So this is also something that you just have to come to terms with as well. It's like, okay, not everybody think it's bad, but some people think it's bad, and that's just reality. And you just can't let that stop you from doing things, and you can't even let it shape too heavily your decision-making process, because if it does, it's going to be really hard to just make things that are beautiful and simple and nice, because you spend all this time. It's like, have you read an essay on the modern internet where, like, I mean, not like people write that many essays anymore, but like, you know, you start reading it and it's like they're trying to get in the front of all the objections that people would have and whatever, and you're trying to read this thing and it just won't make its point because it's like constantly defending itself. And it's like, I don't want that to be my game design, right? Because then that's not free. Like when you spend all that time and energy doing that, you can't get to the really good thing that's in there. So that's how I think about it. So maybe that's I don't feel like I quite got to the answer, but maybe that's the answer to the question.
So you first agonize on the problems to the point that when something comes out, you're pretty confident in how it comes out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know why it's good, right? I know why this thing was hard to do. I know what about it would have been a lot worse if I hadn't worked really hard. And I know what about it is good, and I know why it's different from all these other games that are out there and all these things. And okay, most people aren't going to know most of that. It's not their job to know most of that, right? They're the players. It's their job just to enjoy the game. And so it's not like I could expect people to understand all these things, but you know, usually they just get it. Usually they're like, oh, this is good. And they see that it's good, and they don't need to see the ladder of decisions that got it to being good. But I see that. And so, yeah, if somebody says this is a terrible game, he doesn't know what he's doing, he hasn't thought about this at all, I'm like, that's objectively incorrect, right? Those statements. Now, you're free to not like it. You're free. That's great. I mean, everybody likes different things. Like, this game is not for me. I don't enjoy this game. Those are perfectly valid statements. But like, you know, this is not a well-crafted game. If you put in all the work to make it good and you know you succeeded at that, then that's an objectively false statement. And even if 0 people buy a game, you at least have that self-respect, right? May not help you much if you have to go get a job at Ubisoft, but, you know, you at least know that you did something good.
Nice. Thank you, gentlemen. This was pretty interesting and fun discussion. Now, this will be up for members only in this like internet quality, because I need some time to edit this. But I discussed this with Brad from your John publishing company.
Okay.
And I'll make it. I'll make the effort to put it up as soon as possible. Not like last time, it was like 4 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Like ideally this weekend, okay?
Well, we don't know for sure when the demos gets taken down yet. That's the thing, and it's nice if people can go play it if they hear about it from this and they want to play it. But at the same time, I mean, I think a discussion stands on its own, and it's not like a mechanism for selling the game or anything, right? So, you know, whatever you need to do, man. That's all.
For everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for joining the discussion live. And you fine gentlemen, please stay in the call so that your video is uploaded to Riverside. And thank you, everybody, and see you next time.